This is journey, and I'm stealing Ness's story now. Ness published a volume of poetry, Mamiaeth, with yr oedd hi'n gyfrol, oedd yn cynnwys rhywfaint o gerddi Cymraeg, ond dim llawer. A dwi'n meddwl mae hynny nath enyn diddordeb Cherry. Torrodd yn haws i os dwi'n cael hwn yn yr iaith Gymraeg. Ness writes mainly in English, but when she published with Arachne, there was some poems referring to the Welsh language, and she's proceeded to translate a few. And I got involved in that project just to goofy. And that's what made you curious about the relationship between the two languages in Wales, and especially for us as poets. So when I got a phone call asking you want to edit a volume of bilingual poetry, I said, yes, please. Working with Ness, even more yes, please. So, dwi'n meddwl, ti eisiau esbonio sut oedd y llyfr yn gweithio o ran?
Iawn. Wel, Ness Owen ydw i. I'm Ness Owen. A dwi'n dod o'r Ynys Môn, so I come from Anglesey today, so quite a journey behind Mansell Davis for some of the journey. So Sian has explained about how we got to this stage, to a llyfr prydferth hwn, efo'r gwaith celf. Dwi'n mixio myni efo'r dynas ydi wneud yr un o'r mamiaeth, ond Sarah Hopkins, beautiful artwork on this as well. So, nathon ni roi galwad allan yn hollol agored, so we put a completely open call out. Oedden ni eisiau, oedd pawb i cyfrannu yn Saesneg neu Gymraeg neu yn y ddwy iaith, so we wanted everybody to either send in English or Welsh, or if they could in both languages as well. Mi oedd o'n adeg y clo, so it was running into lockdown, so oedden ni ddim yn gwybod na, so gynnu ni ddim syniad fel y mater, because, well, fel reol, da ni weld llyfrau Gymraeg neu llyfrau Saesneg, a never the two shall meet in some sense, so byddwn ni wedi sylwyd sydd bod ni'n nabod wahanol bobl ar beth hefyd. So nath ni roi y galwad allan, a wedyn ping, 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 ping. Yeah, we had we put the call out, and the poems just came in, and we had more than enough for one anthology. So then the hard work started, because oedd rhaid i ni ddim cymryd rei o'r cerddi, ddim byd efo'r cerdd o gwbl, just bod oedden ni eisiau cerddi o'r bob rhan o'r A470. So we wanted poems from all places on the road. So we did have a difficult task that we had to turn some down. So this is how we got there. Wedyn oedd y cyfieithu nath dechrau. So then, as soon as we got our poems in, some of them needed to be translated. So oedd Sian di cyfieithu rei. Oedd Sian di cyfieithu lot. A nes i cyfieithu rei, wedyn oedd Sian Aled di dod on board. So Sian Aled just came on board as well. So the three of us were translating, but of course some poets, like Sara, sy'n sgwennu yn y ddwy iaith. So some poets obviously wrote in both languages as well. So dyna sut dwi wedi cyrraedd heddiw.
Felly, enw fi di Sara-Louise Wheeler, ac dwi o Wrexham yn gwreiddiol. A just cyn Covid a pob dim, nes i stopio gweithio fel darlithydd. A herwydd oedd yna redundancy, a wedyn nes i cyfro'r mamoliaeth, a wedyn nes i stopio penderfynu dwi just yn mynd i sgwennu creadigol, gwneud creadigol rwan. So my name is Sara-Louise Wheeler, and I took redundancy just before all the COVID things hit in, and decided to pursue creative writing and things full time. And then so I began stalking people like Sian, Northey and Ness over Instagram and Twitter and things like this, and seeing what they were up to. And then so when they put a call out, I thought, oh, that'd be very nice. By that point, I was actually writing for Barlas magazine. I have a column in Barlas magazine, which you can buy just over there. It's a very nice magazine. Sian also has a column, yeah, so I looked into it, and I thought, quite unusually, because I'm from the northeast area, I don't go to the A470 very much, so I pinched along the map and found 3 places, which was handy because you needed to submit 3 poems for you to choose a poem. So I found 3 places that I could write about. What it didn't occur to me to do until yesterday, when I heard one of the other poets talking, was you could ask other people. I could have asked my husband, who does drive along this road quite a lot, but I didn't think to do anything outside of my bubble, which isn't unusual for me, and I'm solipsistic. Felly nes I sgwennu 3 cerdd a'i helno mewn, nes I sgwennu yn y Gymraeg a'r Saesneg. Dwi di edrych sgwennu'r 2 ar y ddyn pryd, cos dwi o'r exam, of course, and then sort of Wenglish ymlaen yn sgwennu beth bynnag. So I wrote 3 poems. I do tend to write in Welsh and English at the same time because I'm from Wrexham on the border, and it is a sort of more Wenglish kind of situation. So one of my poems was accepted. So that's how I write it.
So, answer your question.
Diolch yn fawr.
Wel, chi gael clywed chydig bach o barddoniaeth, felly, dydyn nhw'n better read some poetry. It says on. Oedd Ness a finna ddigon digwylydd I gynnwys un o'n cerddi'n hunan yn y gyfrol. Both Ness and I were cheeky enough to include one of our own poems. Somebody's touching away.
I got the final say, though.
You did, yes.
If they hadn't been good enough, they wouldn't have gone in.
Diolch, Sherry. Oh yes, we're meant to give page numbers. Sian Northey, page 22 and 23. I thought about the cap. How did they get this? A few bedair awr ydi henw hi, a dyna di'r amser, dwi'n yn gyrru gyflym iawn, mae'n gymryd I mi yrru ar hyd yr A470 dim o'n hartra i'n Hydryddraeth I lawr I Gaerdydd. Few bedair awr. Pen arall hon bydd dynion a swyddi, perfformiadau, gemau, gweithdau, amgueddfeydd a chynadleddau. Mor braf ei chodi un rhiban hir a'i phlygu yn ei gamogam fel concertina, eich bachyn, sgwaryn, bychan, twt o darmag hyd, y gallwn gamu drosto'n rhwydd, dim ond un cam, cyn cerdded law yn llaw, fel heol eglwys fair, I yfed cocktails ganol pnawn. Ond efalla, mod I angen y milltiroedd, a coffi mewn cwpan bapur o'r caban gwyrdd, yr holl dreiadau, yr ambell arcyd. Efalla, mae'r rhain I gyd yn ei trefn sydd yn wneud i'n rhywun arall, pen arall. And the translation is called About 4 Hours. I never know if I'm going to tell this story in English or Welsh, because you need some element of bilingualism to understand it. The Welsh was rhyw bedair awr. When? So there's always one. And I like those people. When Cherry got all the poems in, she had the Welsh language ones, and she just very, very quickly put them all through Google Translate, just to get a rough idea that lots of poems about grief, or there are lots of poems about family or nature or whatever. Now, as some of you who speak Welsh or have learned Welsh know, few can mean about, but it's also got another meaning. So for a brief, wonderful period, my poem is called 4 Hours Sex. I really wish at times I'd left it. And there have been requests to write that poem as well. Anyway, correctly translated, about 4 hours, which is the time it takes me to drive down the A470 to Cardiff from my home. About 4 hours. At its other end, there have been men and jobs, performances, games, workshops, museums and conferences. How nice it would be to pick it up, one long ribbon, and fold it concertina folds, origami shrink it to one small square of magic tarmac that I could easily step over, just one step, before walking hand in hand down St Mary Street to drink cocktails in the afternoon. But perhaps I need all the miles, and Green Hut coffee in a paper cup, all the bends, the occasional red kites. Perhaps it's all of these, in their specific order, that make me another person at the other end. We're moving in the order of the book, and the order of the book is roughly north to south, with the general ones slotted in.
So dwi am darllen cerdd fi. Nes I sgwennu fo'n Saesneg gyntaf a wedyn cyfieithu fo yn Gymraeg. So I wrote it in English first and then translated it into Welsh. Dwi'n meddwl bod yn gweithio ar y llyfr sy'n sôn am y lôn. Dwi'n yn trefeilio yn dda iawn ers o'n i'n hogan fach. So since I was a young child, I haven't been a good traveller. So I think I'm talking about a book on the road. And it stayed with me. I still have to drive, I'm afraid. I'm not a very good passenger at all. So this is Tudalen 34, so page 34, travel sick. He swears that this will be the last time he'll take us as we fight for the front seat, stick our heads out through the windows, sun catching flashes of raven and auburn, strands of our grandmothers. This is what we know. The road is not our friend. It snakes before us. He tells us we must look straight ahead, but we only see the next corner, a blur of trees, missed pockets in the planted forests. We try different times of day, see the promise of light over Cadar Idris, then the depth of mountain darkness. Breath held past the nuclear station, we clutch the story of the poet who never saw home again. He tells us it won't always be like this. Our hands reach out through open windows, palms stretched. We feel the resistance. So, yn Gymraeg, salwch teithio. Mae o'n tynnu, mae hwn fydd y tro olaf a bydd o'n mynd â ni. Wrth i ni gwffio am y sed blaen, rhoi ei peniau allan drwy ffenestri, y haul yn dal y fflachiadau o ddu a gwyna, olion ein ddenia. Mae yna un ffaith ddu yn ymwad. Nid yw'r ffordd yn ffrind i ni, mae'n dadreddu o blaena. Mae o'n ddweud wrthyn bod rhaid i ni edrych yn syth ymlaen, ond welwn ni ddim ond y gongol nesaf, coed yn ymdoddi i'w gilydd, darna o niwl yn y coedwigoedd gwneud. Mentrwyn ar wahanol adegau, gweld a ddewid y gola dros Gadar Idris, yna dyfnder tywyllwch mynyddoedd, dal ein hanadl wrth fynd heibio'r orsaf niwclear. Dal yn gafel ar y stori ban, na welaf y abra eto. Fydd hi ddim fel hyn am byth, medda unta. Mae hi'n dwylo yn estyn drwy ffenestri agored a cledra yn teimlo pwysa'r bwynt.
Reit, felly, fi rwan. Dwi bod yn meddwl am y cerdd ers ddwy, cos oeddwn ni'n cyflwyno ddwy yn Blaenau. Ac yn trio meddwl, ella fysa fo'n narrative lyrical, ond ella hefyd mae o braidd fel y can Tom's Diner, cos mae yna lot o bobl yn trio dyfalu lle mae y lle yma. So I've been thinking about this poem since yesterday when I read it in Blaenau. And I was thinking about what kind of poem it is. It could be described as narrative lyrical, but it could also be a little bit more like the song Tom's Diner, because over the years lots of people have tried to guess where the diner was and what the day was that she was there. Because it's that kind of detail in it, and some people have been guessing, oh, I have been to this hotel. And maybe some of you will guess it because there's certain things about this hotel that we just say. Yeah, I tend to write my poems in Welsh, even though my English is more correct, because for some reason I'm reserved in English, so I'm able to write poetry better in Welsh, even though I can't get the treigliadau and things right. Cynhadledd yn y gwesti gwyrdd. Oherwydd ei bod hi yr un mor anghyfleus i bawb yn ôl pob sôn, ac felly yna cynhaliwyd hi. Teithio ar y trenau anghyson a oedd yn well na'r opsiwn amgen, o yrru lawr lonydd unig troellog, i ganol nynlle a cheisio parcio, heb y math o ddarpariaeth resymol yr oedd wedi dod i arfer â hi a'i ddisgwyl. Cymysgedd swreal o'r hen a'r cyfoes, moethusrwydd a ddiffygiol, bwyd anhygoel, a hyd yn oed sglodion avocado. Ond dim dolen yn ei lle i hwyluso'r gwrando i'r rheini ohonom sy'n hawlio'n lle nawr, o fewn academia fodern, gweithaf ein namau a'n gwendidau. A finnau'n fynedig wedi'r holl drafeilio, ar oriau hir gweithio, yn fy swydd newydd a bresymol. Dringo'r grisiau a chrwydro drwy'r coridorau bwgamllyd fel yn y ffilm Arswyd, am felltith y gyfalwyr yn yr eira. Profiad bach tu hwnt i surreal fi hwn, fy ymweliad cyntaf ar gwesti a'i enw sinister yn hanu, o gyfnod yr ymarodraeth gyns. So, conference in the Green Hotel. Because it's just as inconvenient for everyone, apparently, and so that's where it was held. Riding the irregular trains, a better option than the alternative of driving down lonely, winding roads to the middle of nowhere, attempting to park without the kind of reasonable provision I've become accustomed to and now expect. A surreal mix of old and modern, luxury and lacking. Amazing food and even avocado chips, but no hearing loop in place to facilitate listening for those of us who claim our place in modern academia, despite our impairments and weaknesses. And I'm tired after all the travelling and the long hours working in my new and reasonable job. I climb the stairs and wander through the spooky corridors like in that horror film about the curse of the caretakers in the snow. A beyond surreal experience, my first visit to the hotel with its sinister name emanating from the age of the Empire past.
Rwan, dwi'n meddwl mae'r darn trafodaeth yn cychwyn. Mental of the discussion. You're of course welcome to butt across, ask all sorts of awkward questions, but while you're thinking perhaps, na I ddechrau efo cwestiwn I chi'ch ddwy. Be ydych chi fod yn gyffredinol ddim jyst eich gwaith eich hun falle? Be ydy'r peth gorau yn ddyn a cyfieithu barddoniaeth? What do you think is the best thing about translation, poetry translation specifically, not just your own poem, but in general?
Wel, yn profiad dwi'n teimlo bod mae rhywun yn cael siawns sy'n fynd i fewn, stepping into a poem. Mae rhaid i chi gwario amser efo'r cerdd wrth reswm. So, when translating, of course, you have to spend time with the poem. Pan dwi'n cyfieithu iaith fy hun, weithiau dwi'n cyrraedd rhyw pwynt lle dwi'n teimlo fatha dwi'n sgwennu cerdd hollol wahanol, so y fersiwn Saesneg a'r fersiwn Gymraeg weithiau maen nhw'n endio fyny efo rhyw question marks yn un iaith yn does fel ddim cwestiwn yn y iaith arall. So when I'm translating my own work, it's, though you didn't ask that in the question, did you, Sian? But to get my point across, you have the freedom, don't you, to maybe end up with two poems that are quite dissimilar in some ways, but when you're with somebody else's work, it's well, my brain in past, it's a privilege that they trusted you with their work. So you have then I can't think of the word in English or Welsh. I'll try German. You have the job of keeping true to the poem. So mae rhaid I chdi wel, sy'n rhaid I chdi siarad efo y person, cos mae'n digwydd mae bobl yn cyfieithu iaith maen nhw'n methu siarad efo the person sy'n sgwennu fo. So in some instances you won't have a chance to talk to somebody, but in this instance we did, and it was a conversation. Mi oedd yn sgwrs oedd yn lwcus iawn I cael beirdd oedd yn mor hawdd I gweithio efo nhw. So it was so easy to work with the poets that were in the book, to be honest. So it was a real pleasure. So I probably haven't answered the question.
Just lots of interesting things anyway. Felly, mae'r rhan fwyaf o'n waith I hefo rhyw agwedd seicdreiddiad iddo fo beth bynnag. Dwi ddim yn sgwennu'n ffuglenol o gwbl, mae y proses I gyd I wneud hefo trio deall Delphic commands nabod dy hun. So my work is all really has a sort of psychoanalytic quality to it, so I don't write fictional poetry at all. I'm always trying to answer that Delphic command that Freud talks about of know thyself. So I'm always trying to pick apart, why did I react like this? Efo'r cerdd yma, wrth gwrs, o'n I mewn sefyllfa oedd rhyw fath o arswyd. Mae hwnna'n themel fi beth bynnag. Ond wedyn wrth sgwennu'r cerdd, oedd o'r peth da, oedd wedi gorfod sgwennu cerdd yn feddwl am hyn, a meddwl pam o'n I wedi teimlo cymaint o arswyd, a pam o'n I wedi dweud trosiadau o ffilmiau arswyd ag ati. So with this particular poem, it was a really good thing to have to write a poem about this experience, because it made me to think, why did I respond in this very strange way? Why was I so horrified and terrified? And why did I take metaphors from a horror film and then in translating it, wrth cyfieithu, oedd o'n ddiddorol gweld, oedd ne frawddeg oedd wedi cael ei ddweud yn Saesneg yn unig ar y dechrau, felly oedd hwnna ddim yn swnio cweit mor dda yn Gymraeg, ac wrth gwrs oedd y ffilm, mae'r ffilm yn un arswyd Saesneg, felly bod chi'n nabod e. So it was interesting that the sentence that people always say about this one hotel, it's just as inconvenient for everyone. It was always being said to me in English, so it felt strange writing in Welsh. I always find that whichever language something has been said in, when you try and translate it, it doesn't then feel quite natural because it's not a conversation that happened. And then obviously the film is an English film that I have referred to in it. Yn gyffredinol hefo'n waith, enghraifft, mae gennau cerdd nes I cyhoeddi un o'r rhai cyntaf barfas oedd Ben Felen Wen, ac o'n I mewn lle rili solipsistaidd ar yr adeg. Nes I sgwennu hi ac o'n I yn teimlo'n well ar ôl I sgwennu hi, nes I anfon y barfas nath I cael ei gyhoeddi. A wedyn nes I ati I gyfieithu I Gwyl y Ferch, pa mor odd oedd o fel cerdd. Ac o'n i just fatha, oh my goodness. So I wrote a poem called Ben Felen Wen. That's quite difficult to translate, just the title, because Ben Felen is the way of saying in Welsh a blonde person, but it literally translates as yellow head, which is kind of odd. But I put Wen on the end, which means white, because it was talking about my depigmented hair. And then I realised, as I was translating this poem for a different publication, I realised what an odd poem it was. Mae'n sôn am body dysmorphia mewn ffordd, ac mae'n sôn am delio hefo darbygmentiad trwy addoli am metaphaltsbook o Aber. So the poem is very strange because it's talking about me dealing with depigmentation and everything, how I felt about that, by looking at Agneta Falk's-book from Aber and thinking, well, she has hair sort of like mine, and sort of thinking, well, that makes me feel a little bit better. So it's a very, very odd poem, and I'm very thankful to the editor for not laughing at me. So like, he didn't say a word, he just published it. Dwi ddim, pan dwi'n trio cyfieithu gwaith pobl eraill, dwi wedi trio cyfieithu lyrics o fwy yn y byd, Meinir Gwilym yn person, nes i gwario lot o amser yn pori trwy'r geiriadur, cos mae iaith rwy'n cyfweitho. Ac weithiau, ydych chi'n dod o draws gair, megis gwyll, a mae'n ddau ystyr iddo fo yn y geiriadur, a gwaith rhywun arall, mae'n digon anodd os ydych chi wedi sgwennu o'ch hun i wybod, dwi'n ddim cweit yn siŵr beth ni'n golygu fan'na, ond os mae'n gwaith rhywun arall, mae'n hyn o fwy anodd, ond i bai bod chi'n cyfarfod nhw ar trin. So I have only really I've translated lyrics just for my own enjoyment. There's a singer called Meinir Gwilym, and she has very rich language. She did a Welsh degree and such. And when you translate your own work, sometimes you come across a word and think, what did I mean, this word or that word? It's even more difficult when it's someone else's work, because there's two meanings to a word you don't know. You can't even sit there and try and think, unless you meet them on a train. You happen to meet them on a train coming from Cardiff, and then you can ask them, which is really nice.
So ni'n gofyn y cwestiwn hefyd i ffyrio i RS. Mae'n alleged quotes o fo, nath o ddeud bod cyfieithu yn fatha cusan trwy handcas. So R.S. Thomas had an alleged quote that he felt translation was like kissing through a handkerchief. Though, nath o sgwennu yn y ddwy iaith weithiau, a nath o cyfieithu waith ei hun hefyd, a mae'n siŵr nath o cyfieithu bobl arall hefyd. So he did actually write sometimes. He translated some of his own work, not very often, but he did. And I think he did translate somebody's from Welsh to English, so he didn't actually wholly believe it himself, or he wouldn't have done it. So, be da ni'n meddwl, ydy o fatha, yda ni'n colli rhywbeth trwy cyfieithu? Do we lose something by translating?
Did we go and start? Maybe does anyone have an opinion on that question?
Dwi'n meddwl bod chdi yn colli pethau, a ti hefyd yn ennill pethau. I think you do lose some things, but I think you can also gain things. And for me, the opportunity to hear or read the work of poets from other languages. I mean, we're very, very bad in Wales about thinking that Welsh and English are the only languages that exist in the world. And if I wasn't able to read poetry in translation, I would miss out so much. So, yes, you might miss out on some things, but it's definitely worth doing. And it's worth i wneud oherwydd, fatha ddech chi'n dweud, yr olwg newydd ddech chi'n gael un eich cerddi chi neu cerddi bobl eraill wrth wneud y cyfieithu hefyd. I feel it's worth it for the translator. Translating makes me a better poet, I think. Because it forces me, if I'm translating my own work, to look really closely at what I've written, at what I felt, at what I wanted to convey. And if I'm translating somebody else's work, it forces me to really listen to that poet's voice. If I'm translating the poems I've read the most times for an individual poem are certainly the ones I've translated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because chi'n meddwl just skipio
Dim
dros.
na,
Yeah,
reit i.
you can't just skip over, you are actually having, forcing to engage with each word. Felly erbyn diwedd y daith, really, you've got around it, you've had to slow down.
With each word and also with the whole poem.
Yeah.
Ond mae'n digon hawdd countdash hefyd ydy.
O,
Fi
hynny'n llast.
Yeah, so it's very easy to misunderstand, isn't it? As reading poetry, we always bring ourselves to it, don't we? And that is the freedom in poetry. It's nice to think that somebody does bring themselves to any of your poems as well. Ond, wel, ges i ddim, dwi'n meddwl nes i countdash y byd yn y cyfrol, but I don't think I misunderstood. Like, nobody corrected me, so I don't think, but I have had an experience where I think I was taken away with a poem, and it was by a Vietnamese lady, and obviously my preconceptions of where I was placing myself straight away, and she spoke about a temple, so I immediately took it as in the temple of worship. And so I went off in one direction until she told me, no, a temple. So it's very easy to go, to be taken away because you automatically create a picture in your head, don't you? So mae'n digon hawdd, mae eisiau rafu a sofi lawr a cymryd bob gair. A mae'n digon hawdd i fatha mynd yn rhy excited mewn ffordd.
Dwi wedi cael y profiad yn ddiweddar, cos dwi'n gwneud prosiect o gwmpas Lady Hewson. I'm doing a project around Lady Hewson, who is from Rhos yn y Chrigog. Ac mae fod i sgwennu lot o bethau Rhos ei hun, fyny all y gwter hi gysdrydol. So he's written a lot of things about Rhos yn y Chrigog that are very, up this street and down this street and things. A mae gynno fo cerdd am y gwesty gwyn. And he has a poem about the White Hotel. Ac mae'n y gwesty gwyn yn Llangollen, lle mae'n carreg cofeb o. There is a White Hotel in Llangollen where his stone is. Ac felly nes i ddechrau meddwl, mae'n sôn am fan hyn, cos dyna'r math o bethau nhw'n sgwennu fel. So I thought, maybe he's right about this hotel, it's got to be that hotel. Digwydd bod nes i ddechrau trafod hyn ar Facebook efo pobl o'r ardal. A ffidio yn nath nhw atgoffa fi fod o hefyd yn sgwennu trosiadol lot o'r amser, ac oedd nhw'n teulu yma am y nefoedd o o'n sôn. So they reminded me that the kid also has a lot of poems that are metaphorical, a poppy called the red poppy being one of them, and that they felt, having known him, that this poem was actually him talking about heaven. I'm not sure I'm going to handle that one, because what I'm doing, but we'll see.